opportunities too. So in the next topic, we are going to talk about the future of trend landscape, how Corda addresses problems in trade. In this topic, we have two speakers. The first speaker, Mr. Henry ROXAS, he is the R3 Global Trade Lead. He's going to introduce the use of blockchain in trade, and he's going to show you for some cases that is very useful. These cases is the blockchain technologies that we already use in the trade sections across many business sectors. For example, we use in the trade finance and supply chain too. And then Ms. PINTUWAN KLEIJSSEN, she is the head of trade finance product management from Bangkok Bank. She's going to show you how Bangkok Bank is taking the lead to explore about our Corda in trade finance within the Thailand market. So please give a big round of applause to welcome Mr. Henry ROXAS, our R3 Global Trade Lead. Woohoo!
Great to be here. Thanks again for TIS and IM Consulting for having us and for taking the time for all of you for us to share what we're doing in trade. So I guess just before we get started, we'll be covering two topics. One will be about supply chains and how Corda is being used. So we're going to talk about the agriculture industry and contextualize it within Thailand. We thought everyone liked food and agriculture is one of the interesting use cases that we're working on in Corda. And then the second thing that we'll be talking about is more specifically in trade finance, and specifically Marco Polo and Voltron, which is some of the initiatives that we're working on with Bangkok Bank. So with that, before we dive into the technology, we thought just to share a couple of trends that are really shaping the future of global trade, and then we can talk about the specific use cases in detail. So a couple of things. The first, trade policy as a business risk and opportunity. I think environment, it's definitely something that we see as a risk as an opportunity. A lot of corporates today, when they think about trade, when they go into global markets, it's about managing your counterparty risk. If you're selling to a new buyer, is he going to pay me on time? If you're the buyer, are these goods sourced from the places that you say they are they of the quality that you say? Managing currency risk, etc. But today, I guess in today's environment, with everything from the US and China trade war to the US withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership to renegotiation of NAFTA, what we've seen is that corporates now really have to think about how they manage trade policy as a risk. And it's important because it affects asset prices, trade flows, and investments. So something we'll be talking about later. The second key trend that's really affecting global trade is what we call reverse innovation and the rise of the middle class in developing countries. So reverse innovation is essentially the production of goods and services within developing countries, distributing them in developed countries. So why this is a key trend is that if you look at economies globally, what you're going to see is that I think it was by 2030, 80% of the global middle class will be in developing countries. Developing countries are growing faster relative to developed countries, and that means greater purchasing power and change in trade flows. This is another key trend. The third trend that's just worth mentioning, and this is relevant because we're talking about blockchain, is new technologies redefine the rules of digital strategy. So when I was in school, we learned, being American, bigger was better. So it didn't apply just to upsizing your cars and your McDonald's meals, but also for businesses, right? So everything from if you want to grow your business, you can do that either through acquisitions or growing your workforce to gain economies of scale. But what we've seen today is that these new non-traditional companies are defining the way corporates compete, particularly technology companies and the emergence of platforms. And you see it with all the common examples with Airbnb and Uber, et cetera, where they're not necessarily producing the assets. They're managing the platform and the governance, really to help enable producers and consumers to discover and exchange value. And because of that threat of these entrants, corporates are thinking about how can I use technology to redefine myself as well. And so that's what we'll be talking about a little more detail during the presentation. And then the fourth one that's worth mentioning, because we're talking about blockchain, data is the raw material for the digital age. I think it was Christine Lagarde from the IMF that said, the data flows today are more important than the physical goods chain. And what we've seen is that with the increased globalization, the internet, and connectivity, and the number of technologies that are emerging through IoT, et cetera, I think it was by 2025, we'll have about 1 trillion devices connected to the internet. Within the last 4 years, all of the data, 90% of the world data was created in the last 4 years alone. So you have this explosion of new data, and it's changing the way we consume information, make decisions, et cetera. So all of these are really relevant, especially for blockchain, because blockchain is really about managing data. And so with the explosion of new data, there's a lot of opportunities to exploit this technology. So let's contextualize this. We're having dinner last night with TIS and others, and we were talking about pad thai and the soft shell crab in the restaurant. And we thought there's nothing better that people can relate to than food. So we thought we'd talk about the agriculture industry in Thailand. So Thailand's the 5th largest exporter of food. Last year is about 27 billion in total food exports. And I think there's over seafood. There's about 5.5 billion exports in seafood. So if you look at the trends that we spoke about earlier, you think about the trade war between the U.S. and China, the increase in tariffs that the U.S. is applying, where some companies see that as a threat. In Thailand, it's really an opportunity to fill that excess, the shortage of supply. And so what we've seen is that Thailand, especially a lot of the seafood companies, are expecting to grow their business because of all these different trade wars and the changes in demand abroad. But the challenges that a lot of these corporates are going to face is that as they try to target new markets, a lot of the existing technologies are not really suited to help scale, to help build trust, and to really be agile in being able to capture these new business opportunities. And so I think within the agriculture space and other industries, this is very relevant. Paper is incredibly challenging, so I think it adds to about 10% of the transaction costs for global trade. It affects everything from operational efficiency and fraud, people having to enter data as it moves through the supply chain, and it creates a lot of mistrust, right? And when you're going to new markets, if you're looking to sell your seafood to the U.S. or China to really meet those new supply, it becomes increasingly difficult for people to know, where does the food come from? Is this really the right quality? What were the conditions in which it was shipped? And really for them to automate that, it's difficult because today's solutions are all built in silos. And so what you see today is that you have these digital islands that are bridged by paper-based processes. And so what happens is that even when things are digital, and you can get that visibility as a corporate, what happens is when you're going between counterparties, whether it's from the farm or the food processor or the supermarket, things revert to paper. And that creates a lot of inefficiencies and fraud. And as a result of that, the solutions today are not really adequate. And so, what new technologies are really creating the opportunity to create that trust, to help establish that provenance, and to help enable traceability throughout the supply chain. So this is actual solution. This is not just a proof of concept. One of our partners, KPMG, was building this. I couldn't get they have a solution also for Thai jasmine rice, which is pretty cool, but I couldn't get a picture. Really what the solution does is that every party in the supply chain has a single source of truth, whether it's from the farm to the food producer to looking at the inspection agents to the carrier, the port, to the supermarket. Being able to have a single source of truth to manage and have visibility on the end-to-end supply chain is something that's really powerful. And so what people are doing today is using Corda to help enable that layer to allow people to have that single source of truth. And then what they're doing, which is really cool, is that they're integrating it with IoT to look at the conditions of which the goods were shipped, and artificial intelligence to analyze potential fraud and discrepancy matching of documents, et cetera. And as a result, it helps provide a few benefits, which really are listed there. And I guess a lot of what you're going to see is that there are a lot of solutions being built in the supply chain space, and they all claim to have the same benefits. And I thought it'd be helpful to talk about why Corda is the preferred blockchain for supply chains. And this is a slide that you've seen before, but I wanted to contextualize it for trade. And this is one of the reasons why Corda is preferred blockchain for supply chains. What it allows is that you have these interoperability between different business networks. And when you think about trade, a lot of the supply chain networks that are being created, they were created in isolation. And ideally, what corporates would like the ability to have is, if I have a physical supply chain to manage my, say, seafood business in Thailand, if I'm doing a shipment and have a bill of lading, I would like to be able to send that bill of lading to maybe a trade finance business network in a standardized way that my bank can understand, that doesn't require bespoke integration, and that the bank can process and verify the origin of that document. And what Corda really does is enable that. What it allows is that different business networks can operate on their own independently, but when assets need to be transferred and value, it can be done in a standardized way that people can trust. And I think that is one of the really big, powerful differentiators for Corda, particularly for trade, that's worth noting. Again, this is another slide that was shown before, but I just want to reiterate it and put in the context for trade. So when we think about trade, I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of the corporates, when they're thinking about implementing systems to manage your supply chains, it costs a lot of time and money and effort to integrate, right? So, everything from being able to have easy integration, Corda reuses a lot of the standard technology so that it makes it easy for you to understand how to use the technology and integrate. It's interoperable, not just between business networks for Corda, but also with your existing legacy solutions. And the other thing that's worth noting is the privacy, right? So data is only shared on a need-to-know basis. So if I have an invoice I'm sending out to the buyer, you don't want that shared everywhere. You just want to share that with the people that need to see it when they, at the right time. So really, Corda was built for the enterprise, and I think these are some of the key differentiators for us. And then the third and the final one is really our network. So you've seen a bunch of slides about all the different use cases. These are the ones specific for trade. The ones without logos are the ones that aren't public. But really, aside, not just from agriculture, we're doing everything from pharmaceutical to electronics to automotive to trade finance, the metals industry. It's really exciting to see all the different solutions being built on Corda. And I think the differentiator for us is that it's really partners helping to build this with customers. It helps us scale and drive ubiquity. And I think that's a differentiator for us because no one company can tackle global trade. And having a strong partner network is really important to make sure you get the expertise and scale and ubiquity for something that's so fundamental, like a blockchain. And because we're talking about trade finance in the next section, I thought, trade finance is where we really originally started, and it's definitely the preferred blockchain for trade finance. If you look at all the different competing solutions for trade finance specifically, Corda is by far the most preferred platform for trade finance. And you can see all these circles represent different business networks that are building solutions. So Marco Polo is a business network of banks and corporates and trade credit insurers and logistics aggregators. When you look at the number of business networks and partners building for trade finance in Corda, it's really the preferred platform. And for the next section, what we want to talk about is two specific solutions that were built on Corda. One is Voltron, which is on documentary trade. And the second one is Marco Polo. That one's open account. For that, I'll pass it to PINTUWAN from Bangkok Bank to share a little bit about these two use cases. So thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
Oh,
So thank you, Henry.
Yeah.
So I'm PINTUWAN KLEIJSSEN from Bangkok Bank, and Henry is going to stay to help me out. Just want to share with you, Bangkok Bank has been the active member of R3 since 2016. And since then, we have actively involved in different projects. And today, we would like to first talking about trade finance projects that we involved for 2 years now. And then you can see how we put Corda into action. Yeah, I think you hear from the beginning that these are the issues of trade finance. But I just want to say, why is that? At this moment, trade finance is just a simple thing that people sell and buy stuff across border. We just heard from Kun Corda that he just bought one bag for his wife, and his anxiety to get the goods that he bought and make sure that the good was shipped correctly, and he get the goods that he paid. Just imagine if you have to do this as your core business, do this day in, day out. So it's a fundamental difference between the seller and the buyer. The buyer just want to make sure that they get the goods that they ship and they get what they pay for. And the seller just want to get the money as soon as possible. And at this moment, all of these issues are caused by the only trusted media that we have now is papers. Everything is still done on papers, and the paper have to send around between buyer and seller. And because there are a lot of parties in trade finance, we also have insurance, as many, you just heard from many. We have carrier, we have logistics. We have a lot of people involved in trade finance. So at this moment, the only way that we can work is paper. And we hope that blockchain is going to help us address all of these issues. At this moment, because we talk about international, we still have different standards around the world. And the trade data here mainly is about receivable finance. It's still trapped in silo. And because of these issues, it creates a lot of errors when we try to reconcile the data between the two parties. And at this moment, it's a lot of manual intervention between different parties. And all of this create a lot of problem with, according to the statistic, about 50% of the seller, they need funding, but only some of them have access to funding. And most of the sellers or most of the exporters cannot get access to funding. And due to the trap of the trade asset into the different silos. So first, I just want to talk about Marco Polo. For you who are not very familiar with trade finance, open account is the solution when the seller have to first ship their goods and wait for the payment. At this moment, about 80% of trade finance is done on open account. Marco Polo, that you heard a lot from the beginning, Marco Polo is going to build the network of the network bank. So actually, when you see the member who joined the 10-member bank who start, and Bangkok Bank is one of them, when we work on this, we put the customer first instead of what the bank needs first, and try to sit down and spell out what are the issues of the customers and how can we try to improve that. So Marco Polo, we create the network of the bank. And we try to create a better customer experience. We're going to have a few slides that you show how it's going to work. And it's also, we work with the open source, and especially on Corda, to help the customer unlock this trade finance. And Marco Polo is governed by the member banks. You see now here are all the member banks that actively. We're going to make a big announcement in Sideboss. We hope to grow the network very soon. And let's see. So we're talking a lot about trap data and about a single source. For trade finance ERP, the data from the ERP is a single source of truth that we would like to access. You hear a lot about Corda, Cordaps, and storage. When we work with Marco Polo, we put all of this into consideration. How can we create the best customer experience? So we have to make sure that banks, corporate, logistics, insurance, all of them can have standardized data and how to access the system. And then we put the layer of application, you may call this Cordaps. And then all of this will record in Corda nodes. So now you see how we put the issue of the customer and address all that with this single platform. This is a little bit difficult to see, but when the customer, now we agree with our customer how the data should be standardized. First, we agree within the bank and make sure that the most important information that we should extract from the LIP system. And then everybody will share the same look and feel. And you can see that in the past, when the customer contact the banks, the customer have to first contact each bank differently, and different banks may have different set of data, different standards. But what we do is, first, the customer can contact the Marco Polo One Capital, which is the application that can connect direct from the IP system. And then it will be recorded on Corda, and then the bank can access. It's not just bank, but also different third-party providers as well. And all of this, we can, the customer can just upload their purchase order, the buyer upload the purchase order, the seller upload the invoice to make sure they have shipped, and also logistic also can, for example, a carrier can also confirm that the seller has shipped the goods that they promised that they can ship. And then all of this information will be available for banks to give funding. So banks who really want to give funding to the corporate now can be sure that all information that record on Corda are the single source of truth. Okay, I have 3 minutes left. Okay, next one is the Voltron. This is documentary trade that you heard a lot about, letter of credit. We simulate the letter of credit, but then we translate the documentation into data. These are the founder banks. Again, we're also going to make a big announcement at Sideboss in the next few days to show you what Voltron is all about. So basically, we have 4 parties in trade finance for documentary trade. So we have seller, buyer, seller bank, buyer bank. All of us agree what should be the standard information, and all of this information can be shared and sent between these 4 parties instantly using Corda platform. And we also add Borero and SDoc. This normally is, Borero and SDoc has been around for quite some time, but now we can integrate these two. Borero can confirm whether the seller has shipped the goods as they promised. And you see here, we also work with the leader of trade finance provider, CryptoBlock, BT System, Finistra. So all of this also work with us, with Voltron project team, to make sure that the trade finance system that they produce is going to be compatible with Voltron project. The benefit for banks, we believe that at this moment, a lot of exporter and importer are quite reluctant to join trade finance or to start their transaction over cross-border. We believe that if we make trade finance simpler, we're going to have access to much more new customer. And of course, we're going to increase the share of wallet from existing customer. But let me focus on the benefit of the corporates. So very clearly, when we can translate the documents into data, the document transit is going to be much shorter, so they can have access to funding much faster as well. And because everything is on data and is also validated and confirmed in Corda, so we can make sure that the data is no fraud. It's not even allowed to have fraud, to have fake document in the system in the first place. And the last thing is the efficiency going to be increased tremendously. Okay, that's it. That is the project that we work with R3 for trade finance, so open account and documentary trade. Okay. Henry, do you have anything to add?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much คุณ Henry ขอบคุณคุณพิทุวันด้วยนะคะ You can be seated